Good evening, everyone. My name is Shania Wilcox, and my group and I chose to research the topic of human trafficking. My group consists of Shania Wilcox, Gabrielle Destine, and Angelina Abreu. For my part of the project, we will be discussing sex trafficking. So, what is sex trafficking, you might ask? Well, according to Homeland Security, sex trafficking is a form of modern day slavery and human trafficking where humans use force, fraud, or coercion to compel individuals, including adults and minors, to engage in commercial sex acts for profit. This involves exploitation, manipulation, and violence, often targeting vulnerable individuals, regardless of their age, gender, or nationality. Now, let's discuss the impacts of sex trafficking. Sex trafficking not only has physical effects on people, but it also has mental effects. According to the American Psychological Association, women who have been sex trafficked have higher levels of fear and can become more isolated, which causes them to have greater levels of trauma and mental health needs than victims of other crimes. Depression, anxiety, and PTSD are all common of survivors of sex trafficking. Around 41% of trafficking survivors have attempted suicide at least once. This statistic is especially important because it highlights the need for support to address the major mental health impacts of trafficking. Trafficked minors face greater risk. Studies show that 68% of trafficked youth experience suicidal thoughts and feelings, and around 55 have attempted suicide. Another question might be who can be victims of trafficking? Well, victims of trafficking can be of any age, any gender, any race, and from anywhere in the world. In 2020, 42% of the victims were women and 18 were girls, while the male victim report shows that 23% of typical victims are men and 17% were boys. According to UNODC's 2022 Global Report on Traffickings in Persons. I found this source credible because it is usually considered credible for its global membership. Also, it's credible for its established principles and important role in bringing awareness to all types of international issues. When traffickers choose their victims, they likely choose people who are more vulnerable and way easier to take advantage of. Some of these people would be people with psychological or emotional vulnerability, economic hardship, natural disasters, political instability, and lack of a social safety net. These factors were portrayed to us by the U.S. Department of Homeland Security. Gender inequality and discrimination also applies to the LGBTQ community. The LGBTQ community faces unique challenges which put them at higher risk for human trafficking. Over 36% of LGBTQ youth reported that they have been physically threatened or harmed due to their sexual orientation and gender identity, said the Trevor Project in 2022. Now, let's talk about the sex trafficking locally in Florida. Our state's high population and major tourism attractions help with the growing of human trafficking. A newly released study estimated that more than 500,000 people were exploited in labor trafficking and 200,000 in sex trafficking over the last year in Florida alone. A study by the University of South Florida Trafficking Persons TIP Risk to Resilience Lab showed that Florida is ranked in the top of the country for human trafficking. These statistics are very nerve-wracking to hear. As someone who lives in the state, it brings up a lot of concern for not only my safety, but also the well-being of those around me. I found this source credible because the lab conducts studies that provide data-driven insight, and they have also been recognized as the main state database for human trafficking data in Florida. Now, let's discuss sex trafficking globally. First, let's discuss Africa. Africa is a severe hotspot for trafficking of men, women, children. This problem roots from the lack of education, and it is very difficult to be able to fight trafficking in Africa because they aren't equipped with the right information and knowledge on this issue. In Africa, specifically, forced marriages is a large contributor to human sex trafficking. As victims are being forced into marriages and have children, there was one study and it found that about 4.8 people in the population of 1,000 will be forced into marriages in Africa. While the victims are promised a stable job to pay off their debt, they are tricked and stripped of their identification documents, their passports, until all of their debt is paid. But their debt continues to grow despite the victims' labor, which is keeping the victims trapped in a trafficking cycle. Debt bondages account for over half of the physical exploitation and trafficking cases in all of Africa. In Africa, anyone can fall into being a victim of human trafficking. Men, women, children. Globally, 27% of these victims are children, and 66 of which are young girls. But children are more likely to be forced into physical labor exploitation rather than sex trafficking. Though child trafficking does occur, it is not such of a serious problem in countries like Africa. What are the root causes of human trafficking, you might ask? Well, one of the most powerful push factors of human trafficking is the financial hardship. When we cannot feed a family or find stable work, people become more willing to accept jobs that sound way too good to be true. Traffickers are more likely to recruit in economical, depressed communities, dangling promises of good wages in other cities or countries. Debt bondages are one of the biggest mechanisms that keep the victims locked in place. This arrangement starts when a trafficker covers the travel costs, the visa fees, and the housing, and then they inflate a debt beyond what any reasonable amount of labor could pay. Legal clarity is a reliable source because it makes sure law and agreements are understandable, predictable, and consistently enforceable, reducing any disputes. My solution. There are many things I believe could help dial down in sex trafficking in America and in other countries, such as advertisement. I feel like in this day and age, people are so in tune with their phones. Our phones hold so much power, and yet we're not using them in the proper way. There should be some type of educational system that teaches young children about human trafficking and sex trafficking to maintain their safety throughout their lives. This has been a problem that did not just start. This problem has been from the beginning of times. So we need to start limiting the problem by warning kids at a young age to know the signs. I also believe that there should be billboards advertising and telling people that there are hotlines and there are places that they could go if they ever find themselves in these cases to protect themselves, keep themselves safe and to maintain a mental health standard. Yes, of course, I'm very aware of law enforcement. Though sex trafficking and human trafficking are illegal, I feel like it is something that isn't very much talked about. Just like sex ed classes, I believe that there should be a class that teaches students right from wrong and gives an education that they need so they know what to do to get themselves out of these situations and so that they can know how to ask for help. Law enforcement can provide these educational materials by talking to the students and telling them the risk of human trafficking and sex trafficking, just so they know what to do if they get themselves into these situations. Here is my bibliography. The end. Thank you so much for listening.